Once upon a time, there was an old and poor carpenter living in a small town. He made a living by carving puppets and always dreamed of having a child. One day, he went into the forest to look for a log to carve. While wandering through the forest, he found the perfect log lying on the ground. He took it back to his workshop and began carving it. As he carved, the log made sounds saying, "Ouch! Ouch!" Geppetto couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. As he continued carving, the log slowly took shape. Its head, arms, and legs became visible. When the puppet was finished, he placed it on a chair. While Geppetto was sweeping the floor, the puppet suddenly started to move and talk. Geppetto was amazed at what he saw. He was overjoyed to finally have a child of his own. They spent wonderful times together. Many years passed, and it was time for his son to start school. However, Geppetto didn't have enough money to send him to school. To afford it, he sold his coat and gave the money to Pinocchio, telling him to use it to buy books and go to school. Pinocchio happily set off for school, singing along the way. He admired the people in shop windows as he walked. Along the way, Pinocchio noticed a big crowd gathered around a large tent. Curious, he squeezed through the crowd to see what was inside. At the entrance, the guard told him, "If you don't have money, you can't enter." Pinocchio remembered the money his father gave him and handed it over to enter. Inside, he saw two puppets dancing on stage. "They're made of wood just like me," he thought, and joined them on stage to dance. The audience got angry and shouted, "Get off the stage, we can't see." The puppeteer, who controlled the puppets, noticed Pinocchio and said, "What an amazing wooden puppet. It moves without strings. It'll make me a lot of money." After the show, the puppeteer captured Pinocchio and locked him in a cage. Pinocchio felt regret for not listening to his father and cried. Seeing his remorse, a fairy appeared. The fairy said, "Since you're sorry, I'll free you, but you must go to school." However, Pinocchio had no money left. The fairy gave him his money back, and Pinocchio joyfully started walking to school again. Along the way, a fox and a cat saw him and decided to trick him out of his money. "Where are you going singing so happily?" they asked. Pinocchio replied, "I'm going to school, but first I'm stopping by the stationery store to buy books." The fox asked, "Do you have money?" Pinocchio showed them the money his father gave him. Seeing the money, the fox said, "If you give your money to us, we'll plant it in magical soil, and a money tree will grow. You can pick money whenever you need it." Pinocchio, tempted by the easy gain, agreed, and gave them all his money. After the fox and cat left, the fairy appeared again. She asked Pinocchio if he had gone to school. "If you lie, I will punish you," she warned. The fairy already knew the truth. Pinocchio lied, saying, "Of course, I went to school. I also bought books and supplies." As he lied, his nose started to grow. The more he lied, the longer his nose became, over a meter long. Eventually, Pinocchio confessed the truth. Seeing his regret, the fairy returned his nose to normal. The fairy gave him his money back once more and told him to go to school. As Pinocchio headed to school, he encountered the puppeteer from the circus, who was still angry with him. The man caught Pinocchio and, as punishment, threw him into the sea. Since Pinocchio was made of wood, he didn't sink, but floated and began swimming. He enjoyed it until a giant whale swallowed him. Trapped inside the whale's stomach, Pinocchio felt helpless. Meanwhile, Geppetto, worried about his son, started searching for him. When Pinocchio didn't come home for days, Geppetto borrowed a boat from some fishermen and began searching the sea. Suddenly, his boat sank, and since Geppetto was old and couldn't swim, he started to drown. At that moment, the giant whale swallowed Geppetto too. Inside the whale, Geppetto found Pinocchio crying and hugged him tightly. Just then, the fairy appeared once more. Seeing Pinocchio's remorse, she saved them both and brought them back to shore. From that day on, Pinocchio stopped lying and always listened to his father. He went to school every day. One night, while Pinocchio was sleeping, the fairy turned him into a real boy. When Pinocchio woke up and saw he was human, he ran to his father and said, "Look, father, I'm a real boy now." Geppetto was overjoyed to have a real son, and the two lived happily ever after.